Today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different, war and quarrelling in Much Ado About Nothing, or at least that is what it is supposed to say, if you can read it. But I want to talk about the interesting relationship that war has in the play and how it reflects in two of the couples, obviously the only two couples in the play, who are Beatrice and Benedict and Hero and Claudio. And that, I know, seems kind of vague and complicated, but it will be explained. So the main thing about Much Ado About Nothing is the fact, as we have talked about, that the play kind of takes place in this bubble. It's kind of away from everyone else. It's not really a reflection of real life. There's very little consequences that occur in the play. The characters kind of do what they want to each other, say what they want to each other, but it all ends up okay. And I think that certainly reflects in the actual title of the play, Much Ado About Nothing, which directly translated means a lot of kerfuffle over nothing. So that's the important word there, nothing. So there's a lot of kind of tension, there's a lot of drama, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of real emotions, but they all kind of come to nothing. Because at the end of the day, the play is not meant to be taken seriously. It's a pretty unserious play. And that is reflected in the relationships. Beatrice and Benedict, who kind of spar with each other at the beginning of the play and then start to fall in love. And Hero and Claudio, who begin in love, or at least infatuated, and actually end up having a real serious problem, which kind of leads to this tension, which leads to this drama. But at the end of the day, it all ends up okay. And so there is a lot of ado, no matter what the characters say or do to each other. It all leads to nothing. And I think this kind of contrast between much and nothing is super important. And we look at the play itself and how it shows these contrasts within these two main relationships, Beatrice and Benedict, who seem to be quarrelling for most of the play, engaging in this kind of warfare. And there's a lot of warlike language between them when they fight. They really don't get along at the beginning of the play, but at the end, it all leads to nothing. Those hurtful words that they say to each other actually leads to a romance. And so Shakespeare is kind of like, well, we know that they're fighting, but don't worry, it'll all lead to nothing. This fight isn't serious. It's how they show affection to each other. Hero and Claudio similarly start off very shallow, where Claudio sees Hero and he only really falls in love with her because of her appearance, and it's very shallow. And he even says at the beginning of the play, it's meant to say appearance. As we look at the Claudio video, Claudio even says, I realise that I've fallen in love with Hero very quickly. I don't mean to seem shallow. I can talk more about her if you want me to. And he says that he's aware of how quickly he's fallen in love, in brackets, because we can't be sure that it's true love. But, infatuated with a Hero way too quickly, and he's scared that people are going to perceive him as shallow. And so he actually says, don't think of me as too shallow. I actually do genuinely love her. Whether that's true or not, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's Much Ado About Nothing. Does it even really matter that these two couples will last after marriage? Who cares? Unimportant. All that matters is a bunch of drama happens, and there's a kind of a happy ending at the end of the play, and these two couples do end up together. But staying on this theme of war is incredibly important, I think, and it's an important theme when we consider the fact that both Benedict and Claudio have come from a war, where Leonardo actually says to a messenger, he says, how many of the men have you lost in this war? He says, how many gentlemen have you lost in action? And there's this idea of losing people. There's this idea of death. So sorry about the writing, but that says lost in action and that says death. So Leonardo begins by talking about death. And it's kind of weird as well, because the actual two relationships aren't perfect, are they? With Beatrice and Benedict and Hero and Claudio, first of all, there's this reference to death. Then there's this idea that Claudio and Benedict have actually returned from a war. There's a sense that they've actually come from something quite serious, and they've probably seen a lot of death. But that's not really mentioned after this beginning bit. And so there's this kind of lingering sense of death and war. But this bubble is kind of away from that, and we don't actually focus too much on death for most of the play until a bit later on, where Hero pretends to be dead. And even between Beatrice and Benedict, as they quarrel and as they fight, there's a lot of warlike imagery. For example, that merry war that they have. And one of the first things that Beatrice actually calls Benedict, as we've talked about, is Signor Mantanto, which of course is upward thrust. It's meant to be funny, but there is this idea of thrust, and there's violence in that imagery as well. There's actually violence in Beatrice and Benedict's entire relationship. They spar with each other, they engage in this merry war, and even though there is that adjective merry, it is a war nonetheless, and their courtship is a war. It's a quarrelsome war, and we do get the idea that perhaps even though the play is Much Ado About Nothing, there is that kind of lingering sense of war. Even in Hero and Claudio's eventual drama, their relationship, it starts off really calm, and then it gets pretty nasty when Claudio uses very violent language. He calls her most foul, most fair, and he says he wants to lock up the gates of love. My eyelids shall conjecture hang, which basically means I'm going to hang how much I hate you, how judgmental of you I am, how much I despise you, and actually lock up the gates of love. And he says he wants to turn all beauty into thoughts of harm. This is just some of what Claudio says to Hero when he's accusing her of cheating on him. He's going to think about how much he judges Hero for her actions. And in this quote, turn all beauty into thoughts of harm, we do know that Claudio actually falls in love with Hero because of her beauty, or he's infatuated with Hero because he finds her very beautiful. And he says that from now on, all things beautiful are going to turn into thoughts of harm. When we consider that word harm, there's a lot of violence in that word. There's a lot of kind of anger and hatred and violence. It's as if he wants to harm Hero for being so beautiful and for cheating on him. So here we go. We've got Beatrice kind of displaying her true nature in a way that Hero, Claudio and Benedict even can't. Now, Benedict talks a lot throughout the play, and we've talked about this in the first video. He's a bit of a joker. He jokes around. He doesn't want to get married. He hates women a little bit at the beginning of the play, but then again, which Shakespeare character doesn't? But there is this definitive sense that Benedict isn't really to be taken seriously. Beatrice, on the other hand, is a little bit scarier, and I would say she's probably one of the more scariest people in this play because she has this genuine desire to turn things on end. When we consider that Much Ado About Nothing is a play that's kind of in a bubble, there's not much that happens that shakes the waters, no character really suffers any punishment except for the bad guys. Well, Beatrice kind of threatens this bubble. She shows genuine discontent with her life. She's addressing God. In a sense, she's kind of erasing Benedict, even though they're talking to each other, and she's trying to convince him to kill Claudio for embarrassing Hero. She's actually not even addressing Benedict. She's saying, oh God. She's exclaiming as well, isn't she? And we've got a little bit of blasphemy. And blasphemy, of course, is when you kind of use God's name in vain, and Beatrice is doing just that. She doesn't care though. She's angry, and her anger seems to be taking over all sense of propriety. And what I mean by this is that her anger seems to be taking over her sense of being polite. And that is quite common with Beatrice, a little bit with Benedict, but we see it a lot more with Beatrice, that she's got this kind of warrior spirit, she's got this kind of sense of anger, this sense of injustice, but it really does kind of become hostile in this moment when she actually truly shows real anger. First of all, we've got this kind of conditional verb, would, and of course a conditional verb is a verb that's not really set in stone. Would, could, right? It's not set in stone. It's not definitive. It's not definitely going to happen. It's not I will eat his heart in the marketplace. It's I would. If she had the opportunity to eat his heart in the marketplace, she would. And she says that the only way that she would have that opportunity is if she were a man. So she's using this conditional would because she can't do that. She's literally expressing that she can't do that because she's a woman, and women can't express violence. So this is a very loaded quote because it shows Beatrice's true nature versus her gender. Shakespeare, by making Beatrice a woman, is kind of pulling her back and almost kind of reining her in. He's saying, hold on a second, no, this is a comedy, you're a woman, your actions and your words are not to be taken seriously, because not only is this any comedy, this is a comedy about things happening that lead to nothing. It's literally called Much Ado About Nothing. When we consider that Beatrice and Benedict's relationship is partly sexual and romantic, and it's also partly by the way, not partly, violent and angry, because both Beatrice and Benedict start off as enemies and they end as lovers. But there's more to it than that. The conversation that they have at the beginning, which seems to be quite violent, she calls him mantato, which means upward thrust, which can be violent, but it can also be sexual. We get this sense that Beatrice's language is partly sexual, partly violent. And so when we consider this quote, "Oh God, that I were a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace," what Beatrice is saying is violent, but there is also this element of her wanting to change her sex, wanting to change her gender, wanting to become a man, of wanting to literally get rid of her sexual organs and transform into this male figure to give her permission. She thinks that if she were a man, that would give her permission to attack Claudio, but because she's not a man, she can't. So literally her sexual organs are the things that are getting in the way of her being able to eat Claudio's heart in the marketplace. So again, here we've got the meeting between sexual language and violent language within this quote. It's kind of wrapped up in this bow tie of violence, but when you really go underneath, you see that sex, that gender, that identity that Beatrice is expressing. She's saying she wants to change, she wants to transform her sex in order to actually eat Claudio's heart. And in a sense, you know, sex and violence kind of go hand in hand, gender and violence go hand in hand. And Beatrice in particular seems to, I guess, really express these darker themes. And she's kind of this dark underbelly to the play. And look at this as well, by the way, in the marketplace. She wants to humiliate him. She wants to do it in front of the public. She wants to literally display this act of violence, not because it's violent, but because it's being displayed in front of everyone. She wants to show them all what she is capable of, but she can't. And this, oh God, this almost kind of expressiveness that she displays, this passion that she displays, where she says, "That I were a man, I would eat his heart," that is important enough. So there's a lot of potential for this play to become one that's not so happy. But of course the title is Much Ado About Nothing, because Benedict really does love Beatrice. He wants to marry her, he wants to have sex with her, he loves her for who she is, he also desires her. He could become violent towards Claudio. So again, this sex and violence, these two are really hand in hand. And there is that threat of war on the outskirts of the entire play, but it never quite happens, it never quite manifests. And in a way, we are kind of left unfulfilled by this. Like, why was there not a war? Why was there no revenge? Why was there no true consequences? And I think we're just left kind of empty. Okay, so that is the end of the first part. I was going to put both parts in one video, but I've decided to do it a different way. So that is a little snapshot, a little bit of an analysis on war, a little bit on gender, mostly on Beatrice once again, in Much Ado About Nothing. Stay tuned for part 2, which will be coming up, where we will discuss a little bit more detail on whether the characters in the play actually do change and other ways that the play can get a bit dark. Please like, comment and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. If it made sense, you can comment your thoughts, you can just like it and subscribe and dip. I do not mind, but I hope you enjoyed this and I hope it made you think a little bit.